Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Anthony Moreno. New changes to the U.S. citizenship test are on the way. Today we discuss these changes and learn more about the process to become a U.S. citizen. Joining us is immigration attorney Lauren Armstrong with Origin Immigration Law. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Can you share with us a little bit about the work that you do with families in our area?
Yes, I've been in Las Cruces for over 10 years, and during that time I've worked as an immigration attorney, both in the nonprofit setting as well as more recently now with my own firm in private practice. So throughout those years, really have done a variety of work, but I would say the bulk of my immigration experience is keeping families together or reuniting families, primarily for U.S. citizens who are petitioning for their spouse, child, their parent, and other forms of family-based immigration. Another significant portion of my work is also with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault through humanitarian visas such as the U visa, and then also some work with children who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected and are eligible for guardianship and a humanitarian protection called Special Immigrant Juvenile Status.
I want to talk a little bit about the process of going through the U.S. citizenship test and process, but
Sure.
Let's talk about the upcoming changes. What can folks expect with the upcoming changes?
Yeah, so we're hearing that there are some proposed changes to the citizenship test, and so that would apply to folks who are seeking citizenship through naturalization, which is the process of applying proactively for citizenship after having your green card for a certain number of years. Typically, the test requires an applicant to show proficiency in English, meaning not just spoken English, but also reading and writing. And so some of these changes are along the lines of the type of testing that they would be doing, whether it's more than casual conversation, if the test questions will be provided verbally or phase into multiple choice. So it's really the methods of testing, I think, that they're looking at changing for the citizenship.
So is there going to be more of a focus on how people understand English and use it?
Honestly, I don't think it's going to change that dramatically. In my experience with applicants, those who struggle with English in the interview are those who have kind of tried to memorize certain responses, things of that nature. I think to successfully get through the interview in English, you really have to have good comprehension levels, be able to have impromptu conversation in English. And I don't think that that will change so much with some of the testing methods that they'll be using for the English proficiency piece.
For someone who is seeking citizenship in the United States and are interested in going through the process, what are some of the first things that you tell them?
The first thing that we do assess is English proficiency. I'm bilingual, so when a client comes in for a consultation about citizenship, and they have not been here for the requisite number of years to seek citizenship in their native language, then we do part of the consultation in English, because if there's already challenges communicating back and forth, I can predict that that will create challenges for them in the interview process with a government official. So we do a very early assessment of that, and also screen, again, for length of time as a permanent resident, age, since there are exceptions and exemptions to the English requirement. So we of course screen for that to provide folks with an opportunity to do the test in their native language if they qualify. We also of course go through immigration history, criminal history. The naturalization process also asks questions about tax obligations, child support obligations. So really many aspects of a person's life are under scrutiny when they go through the naturalization process.
Time-wise, how much can someone expect to spend on going through this process? Obviously, every case may be unique, but what is the average time, you would say?
Right, so there's preparation time, getting the application materials together, things like that. The processing times for USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, can range in our area from maybe 4 months being the quickest up to 12 months. I would say it can be much longer in other areas, and of course, depending on someone's background and circumstances, if they have a more complicated case, that may stretch the processing times out further. But relatively speaking, compared to a lot of other immigration processes, it does move more quickly.
What about cost? How much should somebody expect to spend on this process?
Sure. So the government filing fee is typically $725. There are fee waivers available for folks who fall below certain income thresholds. In providing their financials, can request a waiver of that government filing fee. But of course, if somebody is working with an attorney, if they qualify for nonprofit assistance, that's great. There may be reduced or free services through that. Otherwise, they would also be looking at legal assistance fees.
Do we see changes like this with the U.S. citizenship test happen from administration to administration? Is that pretty regular, or is it rare?
We haven't seen many changes from one administration to the next. There was a short period of time when there was an updated, more extensive version of the test that was being put forth during the prior administration. That's since been rescinded. So the current version of the test that's used right now is the 2008 version.
Okay. Now, families going through this process, sometimes they may have to make difficult decisions. Can you share with us about what some of those decisions may have to be?
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest sacrifice and commitment is studying for the test, especially with older applicants who haven't been in a school for a long time, maybe didn't progress very far through school, and it produces a lot of anxiety being tested again. I think a lot of us consider ourselves not to be good test takers, so there are definitely struggles around that. Of course, the costs, and then the possibility of having to renounce someone's home citizenship. It doesn't necessarily happen in all cases. Our government will confer citizenship upon somebody who meets those requirements. However, someone's home country may not recognize dual citizenship. So whether there is property inheritance, other family matters for which they may want to retain their birth citizenship, that's a very important decision that they have to consider.
How complicated is U.S. immigration law compared to maybe other laws we have here, in our system?
I think that immigration law is incredibly complex. I liken it to a game of chutes and ladders because there's all sorts of loopholes, exceptions, exemptions, penalties, things that somebody would not know if they just fill out the form. So the forms are deceptively simple for immigration, but can trigger very real and sometimes devastating consequences. So as somebody who's only practiced immigration law for 10 years, I can tell you that still every day I'm learning something new, and it's always changing.
When you talk with your clients, what are some things that you share with them before they have those interviews with government officials to make sure that they're ready and prepared for what that scenario may be like?
Right. For my work, I always accompany clients to their in-person interviews in El Paso because we know that the interview process is the most nerve-wracking piece for anyone, whether they're going through a family-based process or the citizenship. And because citizenship really is that final step, there's something that feels and is very momentous about it, and I think that can also produce more anxiety. So being there with clients, I do think helps. What I reiterate to them is, whenever you get nervous, just remember the primary focus of this is to verify who you are, verify the information that we've already gone over, we've already provided, to of course test the English and the civics, but to reassure people that all the information that they need, they know, and they're prepared for. And I think that goes a long way.
Now you mentioned civics, perhaps an understanding of U.S. history. How much is that, how big of the test is that part?
Right, so I would say the process is kind of divided into three pieces. One is reviewing the background history of the applicant to make sure they're eligible, they meet all of the more legal requirements. The other piece of that is demonstrating good moral character, which also relates back to immigration history, adverse criminal history, and then of course the English and civics piece, which is the quiz or the test part of the interview, in which they're tested on their demonstration of written, spoken, and reading English, as well as history and civics questions relating to U.S. government.
Did the pandemic impact any of this process with folks seeking citizenship? Was there big backlogs?
I think the biggest misconception during COVID was that Immigration Services was just not reviewing applications anymore, which wasn't the case. Of course, in-person interviews at U.S. consulates abroad were suspended. However, cases continued to proceed. And even in-person interviews in the El Paso field office, there were just a lot of modifications that were made. So masking and other methods of social distancing or remote interviewing at the building were other kind of precautions that they took in place. So cases did continue, but I think a lot of people maybe didn't proceed or didn't initiate naturalization with the misunderstanding that everything had just come to a standstill.
What about staffing at the agencies that are involved with this process? Was there any issues there?
Yes, and I think that backlogs in just case processing is something that's plaguing every type of application that we're submitting. Certain application processes are taking 5 years. Waivers that are very time sensitive and critical are taking over 2 years. So it really just extends out the uncertainty in people's lives. And we feel that stress from clients when they're trying to move forward, need to travel, need identity documents, and everything's being held up with a very slow process, which I think is largely contributed to staffing issues.
Has there been any updates from these agencies on how they're addressing these staffing issues, and can we see any changes perhaps in a positive way with these issues in the future?
Yeah, one of the positive developments, at least here in the El Paso field office, is that they have begun waiving interviews in certain circumstances. So if all of the documents are prepared and sufficient, they may determine that they have enough information at that point to approve a case without an interview, which of course saves them time, it saves clients and attorneys time. So that's been a positive development. They are offering maybe more online filing or electronic filing of documents. I'm typically pretty cautious of that because sometimes newer processing methods can still end up taking more time because of the back end work that needs to be done. So it remains to be seen whether electronic processing will actually help expedite the review of cases.
Does the public have an opportunity to weigh in and offer feedback on this process for the citizenship process?
Typically, when there are any updates or changes, USCIS will reach out and offer what they call stakeholder meetings. So there may be specific organizations or stakeholders who they reach out to proactively. And then depending on whether it's an open question and answer or seeking feedback, there may be opportunities for the public to comment. I think historically that information hasn't been disseminated very well. So sometimes just even being aware that those opportunities exist can be challenging for the general public.
What seems to be some of the biggest challenges facing folks going through this process, just from the folks that you're working with?
Yeah, I think it's just the amount of uncertainty that exists. There's still a fear that even if I'm prepared and I know I qualify, that if I have an officer who's not in a good mood that day or just doesn't like me, that they may deny my case. That's a really big concern, and it's a fear that a lot of our clients have.
I see. Going into this field, what was some of the things that really drew you to this area of immigration law?
Yeah, well, I love immigration law because I get to be a bridge between someone and their life story, their life experiences, all of their sacrifices. So many life stories are incredibly inspiring and humbling. And I get to kind of be that guide and help that person bridge the gap from where they are to where they want to go through a process that can be very complicated and intimidating. So to be able to do that and give clients confidence and that sense of freedom is incredible.
Is there any way that misinformation out there impacts your area and folks seeking a legal path to citizenship?
Yes, and I think one of the biggest issues we have is folks will hear about what happened to a friend or a neighbor or family member and kind of assume that their case is the same, that they may face the same difficulties, or that it may be very straightforward because of what happened to that other person. So a lot of our work is really sitting down, looking through the specifics of what is your history, what is your case, and why would this be different from someone else's. So I think even just sometimes there are irrational fears that might prevent people from taking a step forward because something that in reality is not a limiting factor, they feel would just be prejudicial in their case and would hurt their chances, and then they just don't even try. So we really try and sit down and provide individualized assessments to give people that confidence that yes, they can proceed with naturalization.
Anytime immigration policy is updated or revised, it seems like there are ripple effects within communities across the country. We live in a border community, yes, so we certainly feel that. Can you give us an understanding of just how that may happen?
Sure, and I think the biggest example of that was during the prior administration when there were changes to the public charge determination. So that was a factor that was looked at for anybody applying for a green card. And there was widespread fear, I think, about accessing certain medical services, benefits for U.S. citizen children. And so people were really foregoing care and benefits that they or their children rightfully had access to because of how they thought it might negatively impact their immigration case. And I think the healthcare community did a very good job through promotoras and other folks who are working on the ground with the community to explain and encourage people to continue seeking the care that they need and to not let that go on the back burner because of the fear of what if.
Lauren Armstrong is an immigration attorney with Origin Immigration Law. Lauren, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
We now get a personal perspective of what it is like for someone navigating the path to citizenship in the U.S. Our next guest is a naturalized U.S. citizen. She is a graduate of the University of Texas, El Paso, and now works as a registered nurse in our region. Please welcome Andrea de la Rosa Zapata to the program. Andrea, thank you for taking the time to chat with us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's so great to have you join us to get this perspective of what it is like to go through the citizenship process in the U.S. Can you share with us a little bit about your background, though, where you are from and when you came to the United States?
Yeah, so I was born in Ciudad Juarez, right across the border from El Paso, Texas. I was able to come here to the United States through my dad's job. He got a work visa. He got a job in Connecticut. So that's how we first came in to the United States. After 1 year of being there, we moved to El Paso. But within 6 months of being in Connecticut, we were able to apply for our permanent residence. So that's how we pretty much got the ball going.
What was it like when you first arrived in the U.S.? What were some of your first thoughts when you're making that transition?
I think it was a little bit of a cultural shock. Luckily, I was able to learn some English while I was still in Mexico, so my English wasn't too bad. I think it was more the culture that a lot of people wouldn't speak Spanish. Also, a big thing, it was the food. It was really hard to adapt in that kind of setting.
Now, you were in the northeast part of the United States during this time, is that correct?
Yes, correct. We lived there in Connecticut for a year, and then we moved to El Paso, Texas.
I mean, just adapting to the weather, I imagine, would be a challenge.
Yes, I agree. Whenever it was very cloudy every day, and my sister and I, we would draw like a sun and we put it by the window.
So what was it that really made you want to pursue becoming a U.S. citizen?
I think it's just the opportunities that are available to you as a U.S. citizen. In Mexico, the options are very limited. So at that time in Ciudad Juarez, there was a lot of violence. So my parents didn't think it was a good option for us to be raised there. And just like to think about the long-term goals of like job opportunities and everything.
Now, you mentioned adapting to the weather, the transition, and the language. What was it like learning English as a second language?
It was interesting. I was always interested in learning new languages. Of course, whenever you are forced to interact with other people in a language that's not your native language, it's a little bit hard. I took it as an opportunity to grow as a 11-year-old, but it was pretty hard, to be honest. At home, we would speak Spanish, but at school or like in a public setting, we would have to try to speak English. I still had a pretty heavy accent then.
When was it that you knew that you wanted to pursue nursing as a career?
Whenever I was a freshman in high school, my sister, she's a medical doctor. So I always had some medical knowledge and like how the hospitals would work. So that's how I pretty much got interested in that field.
Wow. Navigating that process and going into that field, what were some of your concerns, especially before you had citizenship in the U.S.?
In nursing?
Yes.
Just the whole nursing program overall, it's very stressful. Yeah, I would say that my English got a little bit better during high school, but I wasn't still like super confident, and then come into play like medical terminology, and it's like kind of learning like the medical stuff and then English stuff. So it's a little bit challenging.
Let's learn a little bit more about the process of getting citizenship in the U.S. Can you share what year you started the process to become a U.S. citizen?
Yeah, for me, it was actually pretty smooth. I know that a lot of people have a lot of hardships, like paying for the applications and just like the time management of that. I got my permanent residence in 2011. Then after a couple of years in 2018, I was able to apply for my citizenship, and I actually got my citizenship a couple months after I did the test and everything. I actually got my citizenship in May 2018.
So
for me, it's pretty smoothly.
Oh, that's great to hear. But what was it about the process that you really found interesting, or that you can share with us a little bit about what it is like for somebody to enter that process and how long it may take?
It's a lengthy process for sure. It can take up to, I think the bare minimum for you to be in the US, it's like 5 years. But sometimes like finances you have to take into account that, because you have to pay a fair amount to apply, and it doesn't matter if you get rejected or not, like they're still gonna take that money away. But for the tests and everything, I believe it was 3 parts. One was like 3 questions of like basic US history, like who's the first president, like the Bill of Rights, and then writing some sentences in English, and also being able to speak it and pronounce it correctly.
And
so I think the test, go ahead.
Doing that in front of a government official, how challenging was that?
Oh, it's very nerve-wracking, because like you're like, are they gonna pass me or not? Like, am I gonna get it or not? It's really nerve-wracking, and like I had the advantage that I already knew English, but it still plays with your head.
Now, there's been some proposals that we're learning about that may make the citizenship test a little bit harder. What advice would you have to folks who are about to embark on this journey of seeking U.S. citizenship? Do you have any advice?
I'd say to be patient. It is going to take a while, but if anything, I would advise people to study from like study guides. That way you can build some more confidence while you're going to do the test. That way you have the confidence that you're going to answer all the questions right. But I'd say a little bit of patience. It's a very lengthy process for sure.
Did you seek legal advice while pursuing citizenship?
Yes, the immigration office that I went to actually gave us some booklets. So I studied from that, and of course I went to high school in El Paso, Texas, so I already kind of knew some of the answers. So I was lucky enough. I can only imagine like for older people that don't really have that knowledge already. So for me, I was lucky enough.
What was it like at the ceremony when you gained your citizenship? Can you kind of share with us a little bit about what that experience was like for you and your family?
Yeah, it was pretty exciting. I know that it took a very long time for us to get this piece of paper that means so much. I remember that we were waiting and like there were like so many people. I'd say about maybe over 300 people in that ceremony. And they would give us like the little flags and everything, the American flag. So it was pretty exciting. It was pretty exciting.
What do you think is so unique and special about being a U.S. citizen? What are some things that you really are proud of?
It's just the variety of opportunities that you have. Yeah, I think if anything, it's that, because if I were to stay in Mexico, I wouldn't even, I don't know what I would be doing.
Do you feel more empowered as a U.S. citizen to use your voice and impact your community?
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So what are your future goals now that since you've gained citizenship, you've started your career? Do you have any future goals?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna study my master's in nursing informatics. So that's where I wanna go ahead and head.
Wow. Andrea de la Rosa Zapata, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. We really appreciate you joining us on the program and wish you the best of luck.
Of course, thank you very much.
That's it for our program. You can keep updated with this program and others at our website, krwg.org. We are also on social media. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and subscribe to us on YouTube. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.